We built a case from within the system, surgically, quietly, relentlessly. But that didn't mean it wasn't personal. That night Dana couldn't sleep. She tried, but every creak of the porch boards or gust of wind made her sit upright, eyes darting toward the window. So I took her hand, walked her outside, and showed her what I'd done. I'd installed motion-activated floodlights, doubled the perimeter cameras, and replaced the front gate with reinforced steel. I'd called in a favor from an old friend in state law enforcement who ran a private security consultation business. Within 48 hours, we had a surveillance system that would put some courthouses to shame. She didn't smile exactly, but the relief in her shoulders was enough for me. I told her, softly, not to worry, not because nothing would happen, but because if something did, I would have every legal and personal weapon I needed to bury them. The next development came not from Karen or her bulldogs but from within the HOA board itself. A man named Elliot, who I only knew in passing from a land zoning meeting 3 years prior, emailed me late that week. He asked to meet off the record. We met at a diner outside town limits, where the waitress knew me by name and kept pouring coffee without asking. Elliot looked nervous, kept glancing around like he expected Karen to walk in wearing a wire. He said, and I remember his words exactly, "I didn't sign up for this kind of HOA." According to him, Karen had taken control of the board through intimidation and manipulation. She used bylaws that weren't properly ratified. She authorized expenditures that bypassed member voting. And she hired the enforcers without legal approval, claiming it was an emergency compliance measure. Most board members went along because they didn't want to deal with her fury. One even moved out of the area entirely. But now, Elliot said, people were scared. Because Karen wasn't just going after violations, she was targeting people, using private intel, twisting facts. And once Dana was hurt and the voicemail leaked among the board, the cracks were starting to widen. He handed me a USB drive. Meeting minutes, emails, financials. Most of it never saw daylight. I thanked him, then asked why now. He said, "Because your wife didn't deserve that. And because you're the only one who can stop it legally without her burning everything down first." It was strange hearing someone talk about Dana like a firestorm, but not inaccurate. She'd been calm only because I promised her justice was coming. That night, I reviewed everything. The emails were worse than I expected. Karen referred to residents as wild elements and enemies of cohesion. She mocked elderly homeowners. She referred to our cabin as the rebel compound. She even joked about using the enforcers to accidentally trip over a lawsuit, which in legal terms meant she was openly provoking people until they sued, so she could label them as hostile and have the board vote to fine or isolate them. It was textbook harassment cloaked in bureaucracy. I forwarded the evidence to the county legal counsel with a formal request for an emergency board injunction. At the same time, I submitted a civil suit on behalf of Dana, citing personal injury, emotional distress, and illegal enforcement actions. The sheriff, now fully briefed and furious, notified the enforcers they were under official investigation and barred from community property until cleared. One of them tried to protest, claimed I was using my position for revenge. That's when I made a public statement, on record, under oath, recusing myself from any judicial proceedings involving the HOA but fully asserting my rights as a private citizen and property owner. The court assigned a special temporary judge from another district. Fair. Unbiased. Furious. The press got wind of it not long after. A local paper ran the headline, "County Judge Files Suit Against HOA, Claims Assault, Fraud, and Illegal Occupation." My name was in bold. So was Dana's. Karen's wasn't mentioned until paragraph 3, which probably drove her mad. The article outlined the case, mentioned the voicemail, the tree, the drone, the enforcers. It didn't embellish. It didn't need to. The facts were horrifying enough. The fallout started fast. HOA members began holding emergency vote. Several publicly resigned. One wrote an anonymous letter begging the community for forgiveness. But Karen? She held firm. She doubled down again. She posted a video on the HOA website, claiming she was the victim of a political smear campaign and that certain members of this neighborhood were conspiring against order and stability. I watched the whole thing, then turned off the screen and poured myself a drink. Dana stood beside me. "She's unraveling," she said. I nodded. "Good. Let her. The messier she gets, the easier it is to end this with the kind of finale they'll never forget." Because I wasn't just building a legal case anymore. I was setting the stage for something bigger, something irreversible, and the final act hadn't even begun. The first crack in Karen's voice came during a closed-door HOA board session that was supposed to be confidential but, thanks to Elliot's guilt and a strategically placed voice recorder in his breast pocket, ended up playing loud and clear in the sheriff's office. She was agitated, not her usual smug, calculated self, and the audio picked up her pacing, the clink of a spoon in a ceramic mug, and her breath, uneven like someone who just realized the ground beneath them isn't solid. She said things like, "This judge thinks he can bulldoze us, and I don't care what the sheriff says, we still own the bylaws." But the most damning part came when she snapped at another board member, saying, "I don't care if his wife is bleeding, we can't let this get out of control." That phrase alone, so flippant, so lacking in human decency, was enough for me to know we were close. Close to the edge where someone like Karen would fall not just because we pushed, but because she never understood where the ledge ended. That week, I ramped up the pressure. I filed a motion for temporary restraining orders against both enforcers and any HOA member involved in the illegal actions outlined in the civil suit. Dana, on her own terms, submitted a statement to the court, detailing what happened that day at the gate, along with the aftershocks. Panic attacks, sleepless nights, the way she flinched at doorbells now. It wasn't dramatic. It was honest, stark, cold. Her voice didn't shake. She didn't want pity. She wanted accountability. Meanwhile, the sheriff executed a search warrant on the HOA's private compliance office, which turned out to be nothing more than a repurposed basement in Karen's house, complete with files stacked in milk crates and a whiteboard full of names under a heading that read, "High-Risk Homeowners." My name was at the top. Dana's was underneath. So were 3 elderly couples, a widowed woman, and a veteran who'd already complained twice about the enforcers loitering near his backyard. The discovery made the local news again. It was no longer just a lawsuit. It was a scandal. Karen tried to spin it with a rushed statement claiming the list was a maintenance priority log, but no one believed her. The tide was turning. Residents who had once stayed quiet started calling City Hall. A group of homeowners formed an independent neighborhood coalition. Dana and I were invited to one of their first meetings. We showed up late, quietly, sat in the back. And for the first time in weeks, I saw her smile in a way that wasn't just for me. She saw people. Neighbors. Supporters. Survivors. They thanked her for speaking up. One woman cried and said she'd been too afraid to leave her house after the enforcers confronted her about her disabled son's therapy swing. Another man, a retired engineer, offered to testify that Karen had doctored drone footage during a prior dispute. It wasn't just our fight anymore. It was everyone's. I gathered the testimonies, organized them, and filed an amendment to the civil suit, turning it into a class action claim. That move lit a fuse under everything. HOA board members scrambled. Karen, desperate, tried to halt the suit by calling for an emergency injunction on grounds of community defamation. It was rejected within 24 hours. Her lawyer, a slick man with too much product in his hair and a tendency to over-enunciate, tried to bluff in court, saying Dana's emotional distress was subjective and unverifiable. He didn't know Dana was in the room. She stood, looked him straight in the face, and calmly read the medical report signed by 2 trauma specialists and a licensed therapist. Then she sat down and didn't look at him again. The judge's gavel came down like thunder. The court date for the full hearing was set. Word spread fast. The HOA's reputation was in freefall. Karen's allies thinned. One of the enforcers skipped town. The other hired a lawyer and claimed Karen, went rogue, and misled them about their authority. Meanwhile, Dana and I stayed focused. Not smug. Not celebratory. Focused. Because a win wasn't guaranteed, and justice doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives with silence, with the slow, grinding satisfaction of knowing you're walking the hard road and still putting one foot in front of the other. We received a letter that week. Anonymously mailed. No return address. Inside was a photo of our cabin with red circles drawn around the windows. It came with a note. 7 words, all caps. This isn't over. Stay inside at night. Dana didn't flinch. She handed it to me, then walked to the fireplace and threw it in without saying a word. But I reported it. I always did. The sheriff added it to the record, ordered patrols to increase around our ridge, and personally drove by the house that night. I invited him in. We drank coffee by the fire while Dana sat beside us, flipping through a gardening book like nothing was wrong. She wasn't pretending. She was reclaiming her peace. And I watched her, knowing that this wasn't just about land or power or legal wins. This was about taking back what fear had tried to steal from her. From us. Karen was quiet for 3 days after that. Then came the subpoena. Not from me, but from the State Oversight Board. Turns out the DA had forwarded our case for administrative review, and they found enough in Elliott's files to launch a full investigation into HOA mismanagement, misappropriation of funds, and violation of multiple state housing code. Karen was ordered to appear. Publicly. Under oath. And she wasn't allowed to speak without counsel. That was when the community truly turned. The very people she once lectured about order now saw her for what she was, an opportunist with a clipboard and a god complex. Her fall wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. People stopped waving. Emails went unanswered. Her power faded, not with a bang, but with indifference. And as we prepared for the court hearing, Dana looked at me one morning, sun coming through the trees, coffee in hand, and said, "I'm not afraid anymore." I believed her. Because neither was I. And that was something no threat, no voicemail, no red-circled photo could ever take back. The morning of the hearing arrived not with fanfare but with fog, the kind that clings to pine needles and makes the world feel smaller, quieter, like it's holding its breath, and as Dana and I stood at the edge of the porch with 2 coffee mugs warming our hands, I realized we hadn't spoken much in the past hour, not because we were nervous but because there was nothing left to say. We were ready, fully, completely, and there was a stillness in that kind of readiness that even fear couldn't shake. The courthouse was already stirring when we arrived, reporters stationed like birds on a wire outside the steps, some local, a few from bigger outlets who'd caught wind of the story once the State Oversight Board got involved, and as we passed through security, the deputy on duty gave Dana a subtle nod of respect, the kind of gesture that says more than words ever could. Inside the courtroom, it was packed. Homeowners, city officials, a few off-duty sheriffs in plain clothes, and behind the defense table sat Karen, wearing a blazer 2 sizes too stiff for her shoulders and an expression that flickered between defiance and dread every few minutes as she whispered with her lawyer and avoided looking at anyone directly, especially not me or Dana. The judge presiding over the case was a woman I'd known professionally but distantly, someone who had taken over the matter once I recused myself early on, and she was known for 2 things: her patience and her surgical intolerance for nonsense. The hearing opened with procedural motions, dry but important, and then came the evidence presentations, and that's when things began to shift. I watched as Dana, calm and composed in a simple blue blouse, took the stand and recounted the day of the assault in clear, precise language, not emotional, not theatrical, just factual, and somehow that made it even more powerful. She described the knock at the gate, the way the enforcers pushed past boundaries, the fall, the pain, the moments after, sitting alone, bleeding, waiting for help. The courtroom was silent. Even Karen's lawyer didn't interrupt, didn't cross-examine, probably realizing any attempt to poke holes in that testimony would only make things worse.